Welcome to our next lesson on the Age of Exploration. So, in this lesson we're going to be, well, I should say in the last lesson we talked about the explorers, especially the three big ones, Bartholomew Diaz, Christopher Columbus, and Ferdinand Magellan, but also showed you some of the others. Again, I skipped a lot of stories there, I apologize, because there's some fun stories there with a lot of the explorers and explorers basically. But today we're going to be getting to the lesson of the people that come, you could say, after the explorers, known as conquistadors, Spanish word that just means conquerors. When the Europeans discover the New World, when I say Europeans, I'm talking about the kingdoms of Spain, Portugal, France, England, and then you have the Netherlands as well. And they start basically kind of claiming territory. Well, there's people already there. And, well, they needed to be conquered, at least according to the Europeans. That's just what you do. And the thing is that some of these empires were incredibly powerful, some of the more powerful empires in just all of human history, like the Aztecs and Incas. You know, these are empires that could stand up to the big boys of the old world easily if they would have had the same technology, and most definitely if they would have had the immunities built up. Basically, just not being exposed or getting exposed to new diseases, and not having the type of technology like gunpowder technology and essentially metalsmithing, like making steel, that the older world Europeans had, was too much to overcome for these American empires like the Aztecs and Incas. But they are big, huge empires that were here when the Spanish and Portuguese first discovered it. You know, basically Columbus and everybody else after him. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about, all right, what happened to them. Specifically, we're going to be talking about what happens to the Aztecs and the Incas. This lesson here might just be talking about the Aztecs, and then the next lesson we might do Incas. If I have time to do both in this one, we will, but we'll see. So, moving on here. If you're looking at this slide, all right, it gives you the idea of just where these empires are. You have Central America, where you have the Aztec Empire, then the Mayas. And then in South America, you have the Incas. Just something really quick, I'll explain now instead of later, as we're looking at this map, up there with the Mayas. The Mayas, from what we understand, and what I understand, I should say, is the Mayas were there and powerful when Christopher Columbus first came and discovered the West Indies. You know, he didn't discover the Mayas. But they were there. And in fact, there were some very early Spanish explorers that did make it to the mainland, and then other people who came from the mainland over to the West India Islands, basically bringing stories of who the Mayas were and just how powerful they were and intimidating they were, and human sacrifices and things like that. But by the time the Spanish do make a concerted effort to get over there under the leadership of Hernando Cortez, who we're going to be talking a lot about in this lesson, the Mayas just seem to really just dissipated. Like, it is a big mystery to this day what happened to the Mayas. There's really no good concrete evidence out there saying what really happened to them. There's a lot of speculation and theories that have some supporting evidence out there, but just in the end, we just don't know yet. It's a big mystery to this day what happened to the Mayas, because they were there and then they just weren't like 2 decades later. So, but the Aztecs were. And that's what we're going to get into. So, like I said before, the two great conquerors, conquistadors, and by the way, yes, Cortez and Pizarro are conquistadors, but all the men with them are also called conquistadors as well. So the Spanish soldiers, basically, that come with them. These guys conquered two huge empires, very powerful empires. Cortez conquers the Aztecs, Pizarro conquers the Incas. We're going to be talking more about Cortez here. So, simply put, get this picture kind of fixed in your mind. This is one of the more incredible things to learn about in human history. And to those of you that haven't learned about Aztec society yet or Incan society yet, I apologize. At this point, in this lesson, in this unit, I'm kind of going off the idea that you know about them a little bit already. You've had lessons on them. But I will give you at least a little bit, little tidbits here and there as I can as I go through this lesson. And this is one of them, is what you're looking at is just an artist representation of the city of Tenochtitlan, if I'm saying that right. Present day, that's Mexico City, and there's not a lake there anymore. But it was just this big city on a lake that the Aztecs built. Pretty crazy. Easily defendable with all just where they controlled those causeways coming into it. And this is almost kind of like an inland Venice, Italy, in a way. Just this floating city, very powerful city, the capital city. Lots of people live there. Just, it's one of those things I wish was still there. I would love to go visit Tenochtitlan and see what that was like. Unfortunately, after the Spanish do conquer it, they drained that lake and essentially set up a brand new, well, what is Mexico City today on top of it. So, anyways, but the reason why I want that kind of imprint in your mind and just in your mind is this will play a big part in what happens with the conquering of the Aztecs by the Spanish. What was a very defensible position almost becomes a tomb for the Aztecs. So this is how things go. And again, I'm sorry, I'm trying to summarize this as best as possible, but this will probably turn into a longer story than definitely what you're seeing right here. Simply put, I'm going to give you a lot of build-up to what happens before you get to this point right here. Mostly so you can get to know a little bit better of who Cortez was. So, leading up to this, Cortez is, you could say, just this captain or lieutenant in the Spanish army who helped out in conquering Cuba. The Spanish basically were just consolidating their hold on all those islands of the West Indies and conquering that area. And they just heard whisperings and stories about the great empires and the cities of gold and things like that that were just across the ocean, across the way to where the mainland was. And Hernando Cortez is the first person to say, I want to go see what's there. I want to go basically take the risk and just see what's over there. And if I can, make my fortune type thing. So Cortez, fairly, how to put this? The best way I can put it, very charismatic, very silver-tongued. He got a lot of people to join him. He was able to convince his leader, who I can't remember, the now you could say like leader of Cuba, Spanish ruler of Cuba, to essentially give him a couple ships, a few hundred Spanish soldiers, and just to go see what they could see. So they head over there, and at first they actually had some good interactions with some peoples that were Mayans or former Mayans, you could say. They were definitely, once Cortez gets there, by the way, they are not in their glory. It's part of the Mayans are not in their glory. They're not that great and powerful civilization that they once were. Now they just have like remnants left over. So he meets up with the Mayans and actually have some good interactions with each other, and he learns what he can from them and moves on. But then, for some reason, he actually has an altercation with those same Mayans. Like he goes on and he comes back thinking, hey, I'll go back to those really nice guys I met and let's get some more supplies from them. But again, we don't know what happened here. We only have the Spanish perspective here. But the Mayans attacked him this time. Instead of being nice, they were attacked. The Spanish win easily because they just have better weapons overall. And the Mayans, according to their tradition, offer up slaves to the Spanish as spoils of war. By the way, to the peoples of Central America, namely like the Aztecs and the Mayans, the number one form of wealth was not land like it is to most everybody in the world throughout world history. It is people. People were the number one form of wealth, how many slaves you owned, essentially. So when you go to war, you didn't go to war over, I want that land. You went over war like, I want you as a slave. So, because I'm either going to use you to work or I need you as a human sacrifice. Anyways, so he gets a few dozen slaves, Mayan slaves. The reason why I tell this story is there's one slave in particular that becomes instrumental to the story of Cortez and the Aztecs. I just spaced her name. I believe her Spanish name is Doña Maria. I'm just going to go with that right now. I apologize. I'm just going to keep saying Doña Maria here. But basically there's a slave named Doña Maria who, throughout her lifetime, she's a young girl at this point. I don't know, late teens, early 20s, but man, she has had a lot happen in her life. In fact, she has been enslaved quite a few times to where, I can't remember where she's originally from, but she kept getting raided and kidnapped, stolen, back and forth between Mayan villages and villages on Cuba. And it just so happened that she was on Cuba when it was conquered by the Spanish, and just so happened to pick up a little Spanish. She also understood the Taino language there, but she also understood Mayan and a bunch of other dialects there. Like, she understood a lot of languages because of this, because she kept going back and forth, and she just happened to be in this Mayan village and now offered up as a slave. And she became the main interpreter for the Spanish. When they would run into a dialect that she wasn't too familiar with, well, it was still familiar enough that she could figure it out. And that way, Cortez always had a good communication with the people he came across in the New World. So again, instrumental to the story of Cortez. I should have had her name up here. I'm sorry. But anyways, Cortez moves on after this and gets to actually what today is Veracruz, Mexico, and learns about the Aztec Empire, kind of runs into the first vestiges of it. And learns pretty quickly that there's a huge love-hate relationship with the Aztecs there. You know, if you're in good with the Aztecs, you love them because you know you're not going to get attacked by them. But if you're not in good with the Aztecs, your life is awful. It is just complete and utter fear. I don't have any other way to explain this, but let me go back to the map here. That map is actually terrible. If you look in the actual map of the Aztec Empire, there are purposeful gaps in it, meaning just holes. Like, why does the Aztec Empire have holes in it? The reason being is, again, it's not about land. They weren't conquering land for the sake of land because it's the most important form of wealth. They had land because, yes, they need places to live and trade and have their marketplaces and things like that. But they also needed areas where they could just raid consistently and get slaves and human sacrifices out of. So if you again that doesn't help out, but just kind of look at my cursor and think of that like just a big gaping hole in the middle of the Aztec Empire. And think of that area as a group of people that are essentially surrounded by the Aztecs and continually attacked by the Aztecs. Not too much. You need to let them reproduce. But continually attacked for the sake of basically gaining slaves and human sacrifices. So, anyways, Cortez pretty quickly learns the lay of the land there. The idea that there are people that absolutely hate the Aztecs and what they've done to them. And then people that are very in love with the Aztecs and talk about how they're the greatest ever. And he decides he wants to use this to his advantage. You know, if he can get in with the Aztecs, great. But if he has to go against the Aztecs, he has some very good potential allies to go to, which is eventually what does happen. So, just skipping over a bit of the story here. Well, actually, one part I will say is Cortez, when he starts hearing the stories of the Aztecs and what Aztecs do to people, human sacrifices and wearing of human skins and things like that, and his men are freaked out to the point where they're mutinying and they tell him, "We're leaving in the morning. We're not staying here. This is scary. Like, the devil reigns over this land and we're there, you know, we can't be here." And Cortez is like, he's motivated by something. He definitely wants to stick this through and see what's going on, see if he can get the one up on this situation. So during the night, with a few of his more trusted Spanish soldiers, burns down his ships at what today is Veracruz, meaning that, all right, we either succeed or we die type thing. So they start traveling inland. And this is where I'll just skip a bunch of things. He finally gets to that city of Tenochtitlan. He gets to that city right there. And when they meet Montezuma, the leader of the Aztecs, the emperor of the Aztecs for the first time, I was about to say it goes off more or less well, but it kind of goes well, kind of doesn't go well. Let's just put it that way. But it wasn't necessarily bad. There's some things that happened that weren't so great, but overall it wasn't like they just started killing each other right off the bat. Let's put it that way. Cortez is all about being charismatic and trying to convince people to his side. You could say his way of thinking. And he's able to get in the good graces of Montezuma at this point. And things actually are going fairly well. His soldiers here and there are doing things that aren't too cool. But anyways, I'll let you read up on that if you would like to. But what happens is that Cortez gets word, though. How he gets word, I'm not really sure, but he gets word that the ruler of Cuba, the guy who actually sent him on this adventure in the first place, hears about how Cortez is actually doing pretty well, and gets jealous and actually kind of comes over to basically take Cortez out, and take his place, you could say. And so when that ruler of Cuba comes over, he comes over with a bunch of ships and a lot more Spanish soldiers to arrest Cortez. Cortez hears about this, is like, oh crap. So he leaves some of his soldiers in Tenochtitlan. I think it was like 150 or so. I could be wrong with my numbers there. I apologize. Again, you can look it up to correct me. And they're in this little area that was partitioned out for them in the city. The problem is that he takes Doña Maria with them. Those Spanish guys don't have any way to interpret what the Aztecs are saying. By the way, that becomes a problem later. But Cortez wants to keep Doña Maria with him. So he takes her along with the rest of his soldiers, along with a bunch of native allies, and a good amount of them, to go basically face off against this other Spanish army coming to get him. There's no battle, by the way. They camp out next to each other, and Cortez actually goes over to the other camp and starts convincing, like during the nighttime around everybody's fires, starts convincing them they were better off with him than they were with the ruler of Cuba. And he convinces almost the entire Spanish army that was there to get him to say, no, you actually want to be with me. And so they join him. And the ruler of Cuba realizes, oh crap, all right, I'm leaving. And he just takes off on one of the ships. Cortez basically out-talked him, out-smooth-talked him. So Cortez starts hiking back towards Tenochtitlan, feeling pretty good about himself. But as he approaches Tenochtitlan, he starts getting word that things are not going too well there. In fact, all of his guys might die if he doesn't get there quicker. Apparently what had happened in his absence is that one of the high priests of the Aztecs came into the compound where the Spanish were staying and just started talking to him. And he had a couple Jaguar knights, Jaguar warriors flanking him as well. And the thing is that the Spanish in that compound were just beyond freaked out at this point. The reason being is, from their journals and diaries, they talk about just some of the streets, but definitely the temples, just running with rivers of blood from just how many human sacrifices were going on. And this high priest that came down to talk with them was covered in blood. Now, what the guy was saying, we'll never know. We'll just never know. But the leader of the Spanish was so freaked out that he kills the priest on the spot, thinking that the priest wanted one of the Spanish guys to basically offer himself up as a human sacrifice like they were watching day after day after day. Was that the case? No clue. Again, there was a belief that these guys possibly were gods, that the Spanish were sent by the gods or might be the gods themselves in human form. As I say up there, Hernando Cortez, they thought that he might be the god Quetzalcoatl, if you haven't heard that before, who, by the way, was depicted in the Aztec religion as a white bearded god. That Cortez really fit that characterization, I should say, along with probably a lot of his men as well. So they basically made the Aztecs very wary of, like, how do we treat these guys? Do we just kill them off the spot, or is this a test? That's why I said things kind of went off a little bit well in the beginning. They didn't start killing each other, you could say. Anyways, whatever this high priest was doing, don't know. The Spanish guy kills him, and the entire city erupts. Like, how dare you kill the high priest? And they start attacking the Spanish, and they're besieged inside the middle of the city. Cortez learns about this, and he just cuts a path. This is a big battle type thing. He just cuts a path into the city. A lot of his guys die. He saves what guys he can, then he cuts a path back out to get out of the city. Just all told, you can read about this. Cortez actually writes about it in a lot of detail as well as some of his men do. I can't remember how many people he loses, but I believe he loses like half of his army. By the way, this is an artistic depiction of just that attack where he's just losing tons of his men trying to get off that causeway. Now, when that happens, he realizes the gig is up. I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to be able to basically kind of schmooze my way into a powerful position here. I'm just going to have to conquer these guys. So for the next couple months, he rounds up all of the disaffected anti-Aztec people, I guess you could say that, people that don't like the Aztecs, and gets a major coalition of Native Americans going along with his few hundred Spanish soldiers or conquistadors. and then lays siege to the city. He also takes a lot of the cannons off of the ships that the ruler of Cuba brought for him. So nice of him. And actually builds boats to kind of patrol the waters around Tenochtitlan that just blows out those little canoes, blows those canoes out of the water. And this way effectively besieges the town with a fairly big force. The thing is that even though you do have some battles here and there, just minor skirmishes between the Aztecs and the Spanish during this siege, the damage that really was done to the Aztecs was disease. After the major battle that happens here that you see in this picture, and Cortez escapes with his life with some of his men, the Aztecs start suffering from disease. In fact, that's what takes them down. It wasn't the siege, it was the disease that takes down the Aztecs. And it was just such a demoralizing thing to them that they go out with kind of a whimper, you could say. That there was no major battle, last day siege, no kind of charging the besiegers to break out and whatever. It doesn't happen. And this was such a huge victory, by the way, for the Spanish, for Cortez, that as he marched all over what is today now Mexico and southwestern United States, all the different Native American tribes, nations, and whatnot just submit to him. Like, you took out the Aztecs? You did what? I'm not going to mess with you. Okay, I guess you're in charge now. And he creates what at that time is called the Viceroyalty of New Spain. New Spain. And becomes the first ruler of New Spain. So that is basically how the Spanish conquered the Aztecs. But again, the major tool there is, yes, cannons and guns helped them, and those were effective. But the most effective thing to this was disease. The one weapon the Spanish brought with them that they didn't realize was going to be as effective as it was. I don't even know if they even knew that disease was going to be effective for them at all. Disease was just a course of life thing for people from Europe and Asia and Africa. But for the New World, we don't know. It was devastating. So, again, this lesson has gone long enough. I'm not going to talk about the Incas in this one. I will do the Incas in the next lesson.